All right, guys, I'm going to start while she gets that fixed because we only have limited time. But welcome. I am Nicholas Gonzalez. I'm a product manager at TradeStation. TradeStation is a fintech company. We specialize in providing analysis tools for traders to make the best trades, right? And today we're going to be talking about how we use Databricks and Sigma computing to kind of modernize our data stack and create self-service for all the different teams at TradeStation. So let me give you guys some background about TradeStation while we kind of wait. TradeStation originally was open in the 80s. It was initially just a technology company. They created charting software for the market. So users, it was the first chance where a retail trader had access to market data and sophisticated technical analysis, right? Stuff that was only available to institutions before. It began there. We had it like that for a while, and then we opened up our own broker in the early 2000s, right? So now we are a tool where people can trade as much as they want. They can trade options, they can trade equities, they can trade futures, and they could do it via your mobile device, you could do it via your desktop, and you could do it via the web as well, right, just on your browser. So that's what TradeStation specializes in. Right now, we're very focused on what we're calling sophisticated traders. So that's traders that are trying to do sophisticated technical analysis or doing complex options trades, potentially, complex strategy trading, right, so you can automate your trading. So it's really cool stuff. It's for very, what I would say, like, natural-born traders, right? Traders who know, traders who know what they want and want to be able to make their own decisions of how they want to do it. All right, so I'm going to keep going. I'm going to try my best without any information. So let's talk about my role at TradeStation. At TradeStation, I've been there for 8 years. Initially I was an analyst for a couple different teams, for the education team, for product management. I've also worked as a product manager for like a marketplace that we had. And more recently, over the last 3 years, I've been a product manager for our data infrastructure. So that is our data lake and how internal teams are using that data lake, right? So I'm involved in creating reports. I'm involved in defining what data goes into the lake, define the cadence that data is coming into the lake. And all of that, our goal right now is to create an infrastructure where any team is able to access our data and make decisions, right? Because a common thing you find is that when you have a limited number of analysts, that becomes a major bottleneck in your company, right? Because that analyst can only answer so many different responses, and there's only so many times they can go into a report and like change the, I want to look at this in a different way, I want to filter this in a different way. So my big goal over the last couple of years has been putting this power of the data in our data lake to everyone else. And our users might have different levels of, and when I say users, I mean our colleagues, right, internal users. They might have different levels of knowledge, right, in terms of like SQL knowledge, of Python knowledge, or knowledge of even how our different data sets come together, right? The marketing team knows all their marketing data, but they might not understand how marketing data relates to transactional data, right? Or how that relates to how somebody's specifically using a product. We have the same thing with our finance team, right? Our finance team knows about the commission numbers. They know all of these values that are important, but they don't know how maybe the acquisition funnel for marketing relates to that data, right? And so putting all this together into one place allows individuals and teams to make better decisions. And to me, that's the most important part. If everybody can make a smarter business decision, everybody's able to affect their knowledge base or their department in a way that is valuable, right? And having that data directly accessible to you really helps with that, right? And allowing you to interact with our data really does. And to avoid those kind of bottlenecks, you're using both Databricks and Sigma to kind of give people access. All right, guys, we're back on. We're back on. Apologies for that. I'm going to skip the first few slides as I kind of summarize them right there. But please, if you have any questions at the end of this, you can find me. Hopefully we'll have time for you guys to ask questions. Otherwise, find me, contact me, and we can talk about it. Okay, informational purposes, any presentation, as always. Okay, so I already talked a lot about TradeStation. I'm going to skip through that. Let's talk a little bit about our tech transformation, right? TradeStation, about 5 years ago, was still using OLAP services, right? We had a lot of data available, but they were very segmented. We have data here, data there. And in 2020, we started moving that data into the data lake, right? So we started bringing in data sources. We started defining those data sources. We started providing the metadata for them. And we got all types of data. We have things like I mentioned, like marketing data, so Google Analytics maybe. We have event type data like amplitude or web API logs that add a terabyte of data every day. We also have transactional data like orders or cashiering and stuff like that. So now we have all this data in the lake, but how do our colleagues actually use this data, right? And that's where Sigma comes in as a very kind of user-friendly way of interacting with our data, of exploring with our data, of visualizing that data, right? Cool thing about Sigma is it kind of feels like Excel. So I know if you're a finance guy, especially an old school finance guy or girl, you are an Excel master user, right? But Excel is not as cloud-based, it's not centralized, and using Sigma as like an interface into the data that's already in your data lake is a great way of giving all of this data to your users, right? So no code exploration, it kind of writes a SQL for you. Same live data, the same data you would see in Databricks, you would also find directly in Sigma, and it's got a great table, you can add information, it's really useful. So let's talk about some of the features that I think were quite helpful in our revolution to self-service. One of them is write back. So you can use Sigma with tables to add information back to your data lake, right? So you can get your information that already exists, like let's say order data or modeling data or this other thing, and append additional information that gets written directly to your data lake. Because it now is in your data lake, you now have audit, you have a centralized location, you don't have to worry about sending files around, right? Because that's a common thing for these companies. So like I said, we are an old company. We started in the 80s, right? So of course, with these old companies, you have old processes, right? And so we were sending Excel files around to each other and making decisions based on that. But of course, that's an easy place where you can have errors, right? Sending stuff around. What if somebody looks at the old version of that file, right? That sucks. And now you made a decision that you probably shouldn't have made because you were looking at old data. By using Sigma as like the centralized location where you see this data, we have more visibility, we have more efficiency, the data's as fresh as it can be, and everyone's using the same data, which is really useful, right? And with the write back, we can then customize the data. We can add additional data that our business user might have that isn't directly available from that relational database. So let's talk about a very specific use case, trading ops. For anybody who doesn't know, trading ops in a broker is like the heartbeat of the broker, right? They're the ones actually monitoring people's trades. They're probably the most important team at the broker because everybody's making trades and we need them to be effective trades, we need to avoid exceptions, and it's their job to monitor these and help the client get through these or maybe escalate an issue that might happen. So here, yeah, so another thing that the operations team does, or trading ops teams does, is they monitor models created by other teams, right? We have a risk management team that creates exposure models. And so we have a futures exposure model, an equity exposure model. And the risk team creates this. The risk team creates this model, but it's actually our trading ops team that is monitoring it and making decisions based on the insights provided by that model. So what we've done is we created a Sigma report that shows them this data and allows the user to add notes, to communicate within teams as well, right? If you're sending a file around, it's not ideal because it's not that centralized location. So here's an example of the futures risk model we have. This is all fake data. Don't take any of this as real data. But I want to show you kind of how it works. So you can see that we have the first 5 columns there are data from our model. The next 3 columns are comments that the user is adding themselves. So you can see that I have an edit mode, and I went in there and I said, hey, look, this looks good for today. Oh, there's something wrong with this. I got to talk to the CX team. And as soon as I put in that information, it says when it was last updated. It says it was updated by me. So you have now an audit log, right? If somebody makes a decision based on this, you know why they made it, you know who made it, and when they made it. So really useful stuff. The top, I won't really get too much into the bottom area, but the bottom area is very much the same thing, but it's broken down by symbol because we're trying to look at the exposure that customers might have per symbol, right? Pretty cool use case, I think. And this could be expanded to all types of different use cases because it's just anywhere you want to write additional information to your other data, All right, let's talk about another feature we got, which is data modeling in Sigma. So I'm sure you guys, if you're an analyst, you know how this goes, that one of the hardest things about doing any type of analysis is not even the SQL, it's not the Python, it's understanding how these different tables are related to each other, or the intricacies of what that column represents, or what each row in the data set represents, right? So anybody can go and start vibe coding and create their SQL, but if you don't actually know how these data sets are related to each other, how they work, that's really what gets you. And that's how you can make a mistake and make a bad business decision because you just didn't understand that data set, right? And somebody like me who's been involved with it, I've learned a lot of these intricacies. But somebody in the marketing team or somebody in the finance team maybe only knows the intricacies of their own data. So how does that relate to this other data from this other place? So data modeling is a super cool feature that actually allows me or another power user to define how our different data sets or our different tables are related to each other, right? So now, if I have an analyst in finance or an analyst in the marketing team, marketing team is going to know all about their Google Analytics data. They'll probably know how accounts are open, but they're not going to understand how a watch list works. They're not going to understand how transactions work or sessions work. But here, you're able to create a model that says how this table is related to this table. So your users don't need to understand how to do joins. They don't need to know how to write SQL code. They don't need to know how to write Python. They're just able to select information from different tables and put them together. And then you can create a report with any of these tables, right? Because now they're all related. And for the less tech-savvy users, it becomes a lot easier for them to make their own decisions and look at their own data, right? We want to avoid a bottleneck. I can't answer everybody's questions. But if you have access to your data, you're using the same centralized source as everyone else, you can, right? You can do it yourself. You can make a decision faster. You don't need to rely on me. So what's next? Let's talk a little bit about what's next. So like I said, we've kind of been laying a lot of groundworks, right? We've been putting all this data together in Databricks. We've been creating silver tables and gold tables to kind of define a centralized source of truth for everyone. We've been enabling self-service by letting users interact with this data directly on Sigma. We've been aligning workflows, right? We're changing those processes that where people are just sending Excels around into an actual productionalized process where all of the data is stored in one place. We've created definitions. We've added metadata to our tables like comments and column comments. And we've created jobs and quality checks on our data, right? So our data should always be there consistent. We're checking for freshness. We're checking for uniqueness. We've done all of this. And so I think the next thing is make it even easier for users to interact with this data. I think one cool feature that Sigma has is Ask Sigma. This is very similar to Databricks' Genie, if you've used that before. Works in the very same way. You just ask in natural language whatever you want of the data sets. You give it a set of tables that you're considering your silver tables or your truth tables. And it is able then to quickly start answer your question and also give you a starting point for dashboards. So it gives you a starting point for dashboards, and that's really nice because you can just ask it a question and you get a response. And if you use Genie or any of these types of natural language querying things, it can make a mistake, right? And that's a scary part. You don't want to give that to your users, and they take whatever comes out of the AI as truth, don't do their own research, don't think about how's the best way, what are the caveats here? How should this have been filtered? And that is a big question, right? That is a scary part for us to give control over everyone for. So what I think Sigma does a little bit differently that is helpful. I don't think it's perfect, don't get me wrong, but it shows you the steps. So you ask the bot, and it'll show you, hey, this is, I'm going to filter this table by this column. So let's say I asked the bot, how many options trade did we have this year, and compare it to the same month or the same quarter last year, right? So the bot will respond, okay, I'm going to use our orders table. I'm going to grab the asset class and filter it by only options, because we don't want to see equities, we don't want to see futures, right? And then it'll do a period over period analysis to see how this quarter compared to the prior quarter. And then it'll give you a few different options of how you might want to display that in different line graphs or bar graphs, et cetera. And because it shows you that, like it shows its work, it's easier to determine if maybe it made a mistake, even for more less power users who have less knowledge. Like I want to be able to give this to our executives. I want to give it to our VP of product, and he can ask whatever question he wants, and using his own knowledge of the company, make decisions, yeah, that makes sense. And I think that's really powerful. Okay, before we do questions, let me try to summarize, because I know we got kind of sidetracked at the beginning. So TradeStation is a fintech company. We've got data from all different types of things. And we are working on making that data available to everyone within the company. We want users to be, or our colleagues, to be able to make the best decision possible and do it themselves. We don't want to create bottlenecks. We want easy access to data. We want to democratize that data. But not all of our users are the most sophisticated programmers. And so using a visual interface like Sigma, users are able to easily interact with data in an Excel-like way, but also create nice visuals in a centralized location. And as a whole, this has basically allowed us for every individual to make the best business decision they can. I think there's a lot of value there, and then it saves my time so that I can start working on more sophisticated things. Because I want to go do this data, I want to create a model that does, tries to activate our users, right? Now, because I'm not stuck having to answer a simple dashboarding question for somebody, I can go and focus on that. And that just provides more value across the whole firm. So that's how we've used Databricks and Sigma to democratize our data and move forward, move our older company to the more modern data stage, right? So thanks everyone. If there's any questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, you can find me whenever you like.